Melanie McGuire. On April 28, 2004, Melanie McGuire and her husband William "Bill" McGuire closed on a new home in Warren County, New Jersey. That same day would be Bill's last. The 34-year-old fertility nurse had been planning something far different than decorating their new house. Her husband, a 39-year-old computer programmer and Navy veteran, had become an obstacle to the life she envisioned with another man. Melanie drugged Bill with chloral hydrate before shooting him once in the head and twice in the chest using a .38 caliber handgun loaded with wad cutter bullets. The specific ammunition choice would later prove significant. After taking his life, she dismembered his body using an electric saw. She packed the remains into 3 matching Kenneth Cole suitcases and drove to Virginia Beach, where she dumped them into the Chesapeake Bay. The suitcases began washing ashore in May 2004. When fishermen discovered the first bag, authorities initially struggled to identify the remains. Forensic teams used facial reconstruction techniques on the decomposed body parts. The breakthrough came when investigators matched the reconstruction to Bill McGuire's appearance. But who would want him deceased? And how did they accomplish such a calculated act? Investigation revealed Melanie had been having an affair with her co-worker, Dr. Bradley Miller. She wanted a new life with Miller and saw her marriage as an impediment. Prosecutors would later argue this romantic relationship provided the primary motive. But could they connect Melanie to the physical evidence? Investigators traced a gun purchase to Melanie in Pennsylvania on April 26, 2004, just 2 days before Bill's disappearance. The weapon matched the caliber used in the shooting. The specific type of wad cutter bullets found in Bill's body were the same kind sold with the gun she purchased. While she attempted to delete her history, her Easy Pass records actually showed a trip across the Delaware Memorial Bridge on the night of the murder, which investigators used to prove she was traveling toward the Chesapeake Bay to dispose of the remains. Why would someone delete toll records unless they had something to hide? The attempted deletion itself became evidence of consciousness of guilt. Forensic examination of Bill's abandoned car revealed flesh fragments. The vehicle's location and condition suggested someone had tried to stage his departure. Investigators processed the car meticulously, finding biological material that DNA testing confirmed belonged to Bill. Trash bags found with the body parts matched bags from Melanie's home. Forensic analysts compared the bags' manufacturing marks and determined they came from the same roll. Perhaps most damning, computer searches from her devices included queries about poisons and methods of elimination. The digital trail painted a picture of premeditation, showing she had researched her plan well before executing it. On June 2, 2005, police arrested Melanie outside her son's school. The timing and location demonstrated how thoroughly she had compartmentalized her life, maintaining maternal routines while under investigation for her husband's demise. During questioning and throughout her trial, Melanie maintained an alternative narrative. She claimed Bill was a moody gambler who had abandoned the family after an argument. The trial in Middlesex County became a media sensation. Dr. Bradley Miller testified against Melanie, describing their relationship and the timeline of events. His cooperation with prosecutors proved devastating to her defense. He detailed conversations they had about her marriage and admitted to the affair, though he denied knowledge of her plans. The jury heard evidence about the gun purchase, the deleted toll records, the matching trash bags, and the computer searches. Each piece individually might seem circumstantial, but together they formed a compelling narrative. Defense attorneys attempted to suggest Bill might have been targeted by gambling associates, or that he had staged his own disappearance. But prosecutors systematically dismantled these alternative theories with forensic evidence. The jury convicted Melanie of murder, perjury, desecration of human remains, and weapon possession. She was acquitted on some charges related to hindering prosecution. On July 19, 2007, she received a sentence of life imprisonment plus 5 years. Melanie McGuire was sentenced to life in prison, and under the No Early Release Act, NERA, she must serve 63 3/4 years before parole eligibility, making her eligible in 2071, when she would be 98 years old. Melanie pursued multiple appeals. She claimed ineffective counsel and pointed to new evidence, including a jailhouse informant who later recanted testimony. Courts denied her appeals in 2011 and 2014, finding no grounds for reversal. She has maintained her innocence throughout her incarceration. In a 2020 interview from prison, Melanie stated, "After all these years, I still feel hurt. How could somebody think that I did that?" Her continued denial stands in contrast to the physical evidence presented at trial. Bill McGuire's family expressed relief at the conviction, though no verdict could restore their loss. While one case involved careful planning over days, the next would unfold in a single tragic moment. Heather Reynolds. On May 9, 2018, 17-month-old Axel Reynolds was at home in Sicklerville, New Jersey, with his mother, Heather Reynolds, 45 years old. The toddler's life would end that night in circumstances that would take years of investigation and legal proceedings to fully unravel. What happened in those evening hours remained known only to Heather until forensic evidence began revealing the truth. The following morning, Heather carried Axel's unresponsive body to a neighbor's home, requesting help with CPR. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but could not revive him. He was pronounced deceased shortly after. Initial examination showed no obvious cause, requiring deeper investigation. The autopsy revealed Axel died from asphyxiation involving an isopropyl alcohol wipe. Someone had placed the wipe over his mouth and nose, restricting his breathing until he succumbed. The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide, transforming what might have appeared as an unexplained infant death into a criminal investigation. But who would harm a toddler in such a specific manner? Heather provided statements to investigators that contained inconsistencies. Her account of the evening's timeline didn't align with other evidence. She claimed to have been with her boyfriend, but cell phone data contradicted this alibi. The digital records placed her in different locations than she reported. Why would someone lie about their whereabouts unless attempting to conceal something? Investigators compiled cell tower records, showing her phone pinging towers nowhere near where she claimed to be during critical hours. Prosecutors developed a theory about possible motives. Court records suggested relationship issues and potential attempts to hide an affair. However, the exact psychological trigger for the act remained unclear even after trial. Sometimes cases proceed without a definitive explanation of why, relying instead on the what and how established through evidence. The forensic pathologist testified extensively about the method of asphyxiation, explaining how the alcohol wipe would have restricted breathing and the timeline of Axel's final moments. Heather was arrested and charged with murder, child endangerment, and possession of methamphetamine. The drug charge, while separate from the homicide, painted a picture of someone whose life had become unstable. The combination of charges suggested a household environment far from safe for a young child. The 9-day jury trial in Camden County featured testimony from medical examiners, forensic experts, and witnesses who had observed Heather's behavior. One particularly controversial aspect involved lay witness testimony about her emotional displays. Multiple witnesses testified that her crying appeared fake or performed rather than genuine grief. While such observations might seem subjective, juries can consider demeanor evidence alongside physical proof. Prosecutor Gregory Paw acknowledged the challenges, stating, This was a difficult, circumstantial case. Without direct eyewitnesses to the act itself, the prosecution relied on forensic evidence, timeline analysis, and behavioral observations. The jury found the cumulative evidence sufficient. The jury convicted Heather Reynolds on all counts. On November 15, 2022, she received a sentence of life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The judge's decision reflected the vulnerability of the victim and the deliberate nature of the asphyxiation method. Heather appealed her conviction, challenging various aspects of the trial, including the admission of lay witness testimony about her emotional responses. As of January 2026, Heather Reynolds' appeal is still pending before the New Jersey Superior Court Appellate Division. While a decision is expected later this year, the 2025 status was a continuation of this briefing process, not a final ruling. From a case with limited evidence to one where physical proof became overwhelming. Nakira Greiner. In February 2019, Nakira Greiner, 28 years old, reported her 23-month-old son, Daniel Greiner Jr., as missing from their Bridgeton, New Jersey home. She told police someone had abducted him while she briefly left him unattended. The community mobilized for search efforts, distributing flyers and checking wooded areas. But surveillance cameras and digital evidence would soon unravel her story. What really happened to little Daniel? Security footage from the area showed Nakira walking with an empty stroller during the time she claimed Daniel was with her. The image contradicted her account of having her son with her before the alleged abduction. Phone data analysis revealed additional problems with her timeline. Her device showed gaps in activity and searches that bore no resemblance to a frantic mother seeking her missing child. Police became increasingly suspicious of Nakira's story. They obtained permission to search her property more thoroughly. Officers noticed unusual odors coming from the yard. Excavation revealed remains buried in a Hello Kitty purse. Forensic examination would reveal the horrifying truth about Daniel's final hours. The medical examiner's report confirmed that 23-month-old Daniel Greiner Jr. suffered multiple blunt force trauma injuries, including concurring fractures to the skull, though the specific number, 74, originated from trial testimony, describing individual bone fragments found after the remains were burned. Medical experts testified that such injuries would have required multiple impacts with significant force. The pattern suggested ongoing harm rather than an isolated incident. After inflicting these injuries, Nakira had burned Daniel's body in an attempt to destroy evidence. She then buried the remains in her yard and constructed an elaborate false story about abduction. The burning had been incomplete, allowing forensic pathologists to identify the injuries and determine cause of passing. What could drive someone to such acts against their own child? Investigation revealed a pattern of harmful treatment toward Daniel by both Nakira and his father. Daniel had visible bruising that would have prompted questions from authorities. Nakira feared losing custody of her other son if officials discovered the situation. Rather than seek help or change behavior, she made a catastrophic decision. Jail phone calls provided additional evidence of her mindset. In one recorded conversation, she stated, "I sacrificed myself for Jace," referring to her other son. The statement suggested she viewed Daniel's death as necessary to protect her relationship with her surviving child. This twisted logic demonstrated a profound disconnection from normal parental instincts. Nakira was arrested after the discovery of Daniel's remains. She faced charges including murder, desecration of human remains, and child endangerment. The 2023 trial in Cumberland County featured testimony from forensic pathologists who detailed the extent of Daniel's injuries. Prosecutors presented the surveillance footage, phone data, and her own jail calls. The jury convicted Nakira Greiner on all charges. She received a sentence of life imprisonment without possibility of parole, plus additional consecutive terms for related charges. The sentence reflected the vulnerability of the victim and the calculated nature of the cover-up. Nakira appealed her conviction, challenging the admission of certain expert testimony. In 2025, the appellate court denied her appeal, finding the trial court properly handled evidentiary issues. She remains in a New Jersey correctional facility. Court proceedings remembered Daniel Jr. as a toddler whose death shocked the Bridgeton community. While some cases involve family relationships, others emerge from confrontations with authority. Leslie Nelson. On April 20th, 1995, officers from the Haddon Heights Police Department in New Jersey arrived at Leslie Nelson's residence to execute a warrant for illegal weapon possession. The officers had no way of knowing the routine warrant service would end in tragedy. Leslie Nelson, who had transitioned and was living as female, had an extensive collection of weapons and harbored deep paranoia about government intrusion. What happened next would make headlines across the state. Officer John McLaughlin entered the residence and encountered Nelson inside. A confrontation developed over the officer's presence and their intent to search her home. Nelson shot McLaughlin fatally during this initial encounter. Officer John Norcross attempted to respond to the situation. Nelson fired at him from a window using an AK-47 rifle, taking his life as well. Officer Richard Norcross sustained injuries during the incident, but survived. The scene transformed from a warrant service into an active shooter situation, requiring tactical response. A standoff developed as additional officers arrived and secured the perimeter. Nelson remained barricaded inside her home, armed with multiple weapons. Negotiators worked to resolve the situation without further casualties. The standoff lasted several hours, with tactical teams positioning themselves around the residence. News media arrived, broadcasting updates as the situation unfolded. After hours of standoff, Nelson eventually surrendered. She emerged from the home without additional shots being fired, though the psychological toll on responding officers was immense. Two of their colleagues lay deceased, and the scene had transformed a quiet neighborhood into a war zone. But what drove someone to shoot law enforcement officers executing a legal warrant? Background investigation revealed Nelson suffered from depression and paranoia. She had an intense fixation on firearms, viewing them as essential for some revolutionary purpose. Mental health evaluations noted her resistance to having her bedroom searched, suggesting the warrant triggered an outsized response fueled by her psychological state. Her mental illness didn't excuse the acts, but provided context for understanding the tragedy. Psychiatrists who evaluated her noted a disconnect between her perception of threats and actual reality. She had constructed elaborate narratives about government persecution that had no basis in fact. The weapons collection represented her attempt to prepare for imagined conflicts rather than any genuine threat she faced. Nelson pleaded guilty to 2 counts of capital murder and 1 count of aggravated assault. The plea avoided a full trial on guilt but required a penalty phase to determine sentencing. The jury recommended death for Officer Norcross's ending and life imprisonment for Officer McLaughlin's case. This made Nelson briefly the first woman on New Jersey's death row. However, the death sentence didn't stand. In 1998, the New Jersey Supreme Court vacated the death penalty due to a Brady violation, where prosecutors failed to disclose exculpatory information to the defense. She was resentenced to life imprisonment. Following her resentencing to life with a 30-year mandatory minimum, Leslie Nelson became eligible for parole in 2025. However, as of early 2026, the New Jersey Parole Board has denied her initial application, citing the gravity of the offenses against law enforcement From a confrontation with police to carefully orchestrated plans involving multiple victims. Latonia Bellamy. On August 13, 2008, a peaceful evening in Jersey City turned deadly when gunfire erupted in an apartment. The engaged couple living there, preparing for their upcoming wedding, became victims of a cold-blooded plan. But who would target people with no obvious enemies? And what could motivate such an act? Latonia Bellamy had grown up in difficult circumstances. She spent time in DCPP care and experienced hardship during her developmental years. Her cousin wielded significant influence over her decisions and actions. On that August evening, they decided to commit a home invasion for robbery purposes. The engaged couple died from gunshot wounds, one from a shotgun and the other from a handgun. The scene suggested a deliberate attack rather than a robbery gone wrong. Investigators found evidence indicating the perpetrators came prepared to use lethal force rather than simply steal property and flee. Ballistics analysis traced the weapons used in the attack. Shell casings and bullet fragments provided crucial forensic links. Neighbors reported hearing multiple shots in rapid succession, suggesting an overwhelming assault that gave the victims no chance to defend themselves or escape. During trial, evidence showed Bellamy fired weapons, but not necessarily at the victims themselves. This distinction became important in appeals. However, her participation in the home invasion that resulted in 2 deaths made her legally culpable under felony murder doctrine. Even if her cousin fired the fatal shots, her involvement in the underlying crime meant she shared responsibility. New Jersey law holds all participants in a felony accountable when someone dies during commission of that felony, regardless of who pulled the trigger. Bellamy was convicted and originally sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, plus 45 years. The consecutive nature of the life sentences effectively guaranteed she would die in prison. However, appellate courts later found issues with this sentencing structure. In April 2024, Latonia Bellamy was resentenced to 60 years in prison, 30 years for each victim, to be served consecutively under the No Early Release Act, meaning she must serve 51 years before she is eligible for parole. The judge noted the cold-blooded nature of invading a home and taking 2 lives. The victims' families attended the resentencing, expressing their ongoing grief and frustration that no sentence could restore their loved ones. One family member described the permanent void left by losing someone who was days away from their wedding, robbed of a future they had planned together. While some cases involve a single incident, the next would reveal a pattern of calculated schemes. Celestine Payne. Between 2011 and 2012, a series of suspicious deaths in Paterson, New Jersey, would eventually connect to one person, Celestine Payne, a homemaker who had developed a pattern of targeting vulnerable individuals. Her methods varied, but the motive remained consistent: financial gain through insurance fraud and theft. How many people had fallen victim before investigators uncovered the pattern? Celestine's most infamous case involved Tara Carter, who died from a combination of poisoning, stabbing, and bludgeoning. The excessive nature of the attack suggested rage or a desire to ensure the victim couldn't survive. But Tara wasn't Celestine's only victim. Investigation revealed she had been involved in multiple suspicious deaths and attempted eliminations, all connected to financial scams. Detectives discovered a pattern spanning years, with insurance policies taken out on various individuals who later died under questionable circumstances. Celestine operated by befriending vulnerable individuals, often those with limited family support or financial resources. She would position herself as a caregiver or trusted friend. Once established in their lives, she would manipulate finances, forge documents, and eventually eliminate them when they became obstacles or when insurance payouts became available. In Tara Carter's case specifically, the combination of methods suggested Celestine had experimented with different approaches when one didn't work quickly enough. The poison alone didn't act fast enough, leading to the more direct methods of stabbing and blunt force trauma. Forensic evidence in multiple cases pointed to Celestine's involvement. The pattern of suspicious deaths around her became impossible to ignore once investigators began connecting the dots. Witnesses testified about her access to victims and her financial desperation that motivated the schemes. Insurance investigators flagged the pattern of policies being purchased shortly before policyholders died, with Celestine often named as beneficiary despite tenuous relationships with the deceased. Celestine was convicted of murder and related charges for multiple cases. She received substantial sentences that would keep her incarcerated for decades. As of 2026, Celestine Payne remains incarcerated at the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women. While she filed for a sentence reduction in 2024, the courts have upheld her life sentence for the murder of Tara Carter and the related fraud schemes. Her case serves as a reminder that predators don't always match stereotypes. She appeared as a helpful neighbor and friend while plotting the elimination of those who trusted her. The investigation into her activities continues, with authorities reviewing other suspicious deaths in her orbit to determine if additional victims remain unidentified. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. Some schemes unfold over months, while others erupt in moments of desperation. Jamie Farthing. In February 1994, the body of 51-year-old Carl Petrone was discovered in his Linden, New Jersey apartment. The retired postal worker lived alone and kept to himself. When neighbors noticed unusual activity at his residence and an unpleasant odor, they contacted authorities. What police found inside would reveal a robbery scheme that had turned fatal. But who had targeted this seemingly random victim? Carl Petrone died from ligature strangulation, with forensic examination revealing a hyoid bone fracture consistent with neck compression. The medical examiner determined someone had applied sustained pressure to his neck until he succumbed. The scene showed signs of robbery, with valuables missing and drawers rifled through. Investigators needed to determine whether this was a burglary interrupted or something more calculated. Investigation traced the crime to Jamie Farthing and her male accomplice. Jamie, originally from Georgia, had been kicked out of her home at 18 and drifted into criminal circles. By her 20s, she had become involved in a scheme targeting vulnerable individuals for robbery. Carl Petrone fit the profile: elderly, living alone, and unlikely to have sophisticated security measures. The plan involved gaining entry to Petrone's apartment under false pretenses, then robbing him. What transformed a robbery into something fatal remains disputed. The prosecution argued the pair always intended to eliminate the witness who could identify them. The defense claimed the situation escalated unexpectedly. Regardless of original intent, Carl Petrone ended up deceased in his own home. How did investigators connect Jamie Farthing to the crime? Forensic evidence placed her at the scene. Fingerprints, witness statements about strangers in the building, and items stolen from Petrone that later surfaced in pawn shops created a trail leading to Farthing and her accomplice. Cell phone records and timeline analysis demonstrated they had been in the area when the crime occurred. The case against them strengthened as more physical evidence emerged. Detectives traced the stolen property through pawn shop records, which required sellers to provide identification. This paper trail led directly to both suspects. Additionally, forensic analysis of the ligature marks on Petrone's neck provided information about the type of material used and the approximate force applied. These details, when combined with witness accounts and physical evidence, created a comprehensive picture of what transpired in Patron's apartment that day. During trial proceedings, Jamie attempted to minimize her role, suggesting her accomplice had been primarily responsible for the fatal act. However, New Jersey's felony murder rule meant that anyone participating in a felony resulting in death bears criminal responsibility, regardless of who personally inflicted the fatal injury. Her presence and participation in the robbery made her equally culpable in the law's eyes. The jury heard testimony about the planning that went into selecting Patron as a target. They learned about the false pretenses used to gain entry. They saw forensic evidence linking both defendants to the scene. The deliberation resulted in conviction on multiple counts, including murder, robbery, and burglary. Jamie Farthing received a substantial prison sentence for her role in Carl Patron's case. She was released on parole in 2023 after serving nearly 30 years. However, as of early 2026, she has remained under strict supervision without further reported legal incidents. Carl Patron's family described him as a quiet man who had worked his entire career with the Postal Service. He looked forward to retirement and simple pleasures. Instead, his final moments involved strangers who saw him only as a target for financial gain. The randomness of his selection made his case particularly chilling for others living alone in the area. While that case involved a robbery scheme, the next would reveal a far more calculated approach to ending a life. Tianlei Li. In January 2011, Tianlei Li's husband, Xiaoye Wang, was admitted to the hospital with mysterious symptoms. He died on January 26, 2011, from what was later determined to be thallium poisoning. The 41-year-old chemist and researcher had been suffering from mysterious symptoms for days. When paramedics arrived, they found Xiaoye in critical condition. He died shortly after reaching the hospital. Initially, his passing seemed like a tragic medical event. But what toxicology reports would reveal would transform the investigation into a homicide case. How does a chemist use her expertise for something so sinister? Tianlei Li had immigrated from China and built a career in chemistry, working in laboratories and understanding complex chemical compounds. Her husband, Xiaoye Wang, was also a researcher. To outside observers, they appeared to be a professional couple pursuing successful careers. However, their marriage had been deteriorating, with divorce discussions creating tension between them. Toxicology analysis of Xiaoye's blood and tissue samples revealed the presence of thallium, a highly toxic heavy metal. The concentration found in his system was lethal. Thallium poisoning causes severe symptoms, including neurological damage, organ failure, and eventually death. It's not a substance someone accidentally ingests. Someone with knowledge of chemistry would understand exactly what effect thallium would have on the human body. Investigators immediately focused on Tianlei, given her chemistry background and access to laboratory materials. How difficult would it be for a trained chemist to obtain thallium? The answer: not very difficult for someone with the right professional connections and knowledge of where such materials were stored or could be purchased. The specificity of the poison pointed towards someone with scientific expertise rather than an amateur. Thallium, while highly toxic, has legitimate industrial and research applications, meaning it exists in laboratory inventories. Someone with Tianlei's credentials could potentially access it through professional channels or know how to acquire it without raising immediate suspicion. The investigation included reviewing laboratory records to trace any missing thallium or unusual procurement requests, though establishing a definitive source proved challenging. The investigation revealed that the poisoning occurred through a single calculated dose rather than gradual exposure over time. This suggested premeditation rather than a crime of passion. Someone had carefully measured out a lethal quantity and administered it in a way that would initially mimic natural illness before the victim's condition deteriorated beyond recovery. During the investigation, a key witness claimed Tianli had confessed details about the poisoning. This testimony proved crucial at trial. The witness described conversations where Tianli allegedly admitted to planning and executing the poisoning. Defense attorneys challenged the credibility of this witness, but the jury found the testimony persuasive when combined with the forensic evidence. What motivated someone to poison their spouse? Court proceedings revealed the couple's marriage had reached a breaking point, with divorce disputes creating animosity. Financial considerations, property division, and other divorce-related conflicts provided potential motives. Prosecutors argued Tianli saw elimination as preferable to divorce proceedings that might not favor her interests. The use of poison, rather than a direct confrontation, suggested someone who wanted the death to appear natural, or at least not immediately attributable to her. Tianli Li was convicted of murder and received a substantial prison sentence. She has maintained her innocence throughout her incarceration. In March 2025, the New Jersey Appellate Division denied Tianli Li's latest petition for a new trial, ruling that the circumstantial evidence and laboratory records showing she ordered thallium through her employer, Bristol Myers Squibb, were sufficient for conviction. She argues this false testimony secured her wrongful conviction and that the forensic evidence alone doesn't prove she administered the poison. Her legal team continues pursuing appeals. The case raised concerns about how professionals with access to dangerous materials might misuse their expertise. Laboratories and chemical suppliers reviewed their security protocols after Tianli's case. The question of how someone obtained thallium prompted institutional examinations of inventory controls and access restrictions. Xiaoye Wang's family expressed devastation at losing him and frustration that someone who shared his life used specialized knowledge to end it. His colleagues in the research community remembered him as dedicated and talented, making his death particularly tragic for those who worked alongside him, from calculated poisoning to an eruption of rage over property disputes. Sherry Lee Heffernan. On October 3, 2021, police in Surf City, New Jersey, responded to a residence where they discovered two bodies. John Heffernan, 75 years old, and his girlfriend Francine Bobb, 73, had been attacked with extreme ferocity. The scene showed signs of both shooting and stabbing, with forensic examination revealing approximately 90 stab wounds between the two victims, along with gunshot injuries. The excessive nature of the attack suggested intense rage. But who would harbor such fury against an elderly couple? Sherry Lee Heffernan was John's daughter, a real estate professional who had become increasingly estranged from her father. The relationship had deteriorated over disagreements about John selling his house. The property dispute represented more than just finances. It involved family inheritance expectations and Sherry's belief that she deserved control over her father's assets. When John decided to sell and move with Francine, Sherry viewed this as betrayal. How does a property dispute escalate to such extremes? Sherry had been a realtor in Pennsylvania, understanding property values and financial implications of real estate transactions. Her father's decision to sell the house and potentially spend or redistribute assets she considered her inheritance triggered escalating conflicts. Phone records and witness statements documented increasingly hostile interactions between Sherry and her father in the months before the attacks. On the day of the crimes, Sherry traveled to her father's residence armed with both a gun and knives. The presence of multiple weapons suggested premeditation rather than an argument that spiraled out of control. She confronted John and Francine, and what followed was a sustained attack of shocking brutality, The 90 combined stab wounds indicated someone who continued the assault well beyond what was necessary to cause death, suggesting the act was driven by rage rather than simple intent to end lives. Forensic evidence at the scene included blood spatter patterns, ballistic evidence from the gunshots, and the weapons themselves. DNA analysis linked Sherry to the crime scene. Digital evidence from phones and computers showed her planning and her state of mind leading up to the attacks. The combination of physical and digital proof created an overwhelming case. Blood spatter analysts testified about the positions of the victims and attacker during the assault, reconstructing the sequence of events. The pattern indicated prolonged attacks rather than quick, fatal strikes, supporting the theory of rage-driven actions. Ballistic experts matched bullets recovered from the scene to a weapon traced to Sherry's possession. Text messages and internet searches from her devices showed escalating anger about the property situation and research into her father's plans. After the attacks, Sherry fled but was apprehended by authorities. During questioning and throughout legal proceedings, she claimed she was being framed. She offered various alternative theories about who might have targeted her father and his girlfriend. However, the forensic evidence contradicted these claims. Her presence at the scene, the weapons traced to her, and the motive established through documented conflicts all pointed toward her guilt. Sherry Lee Heffernan was convicted of 2 counts of murder along with related charges. She received consecutive life sentences, ensuring she would never be released. The judge's remarks during sentencing emphasized the premeditated nature of the crimes and the vulnerability of the elderly victims who should have been able to trust their family member. Sherry Heffernan was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in 2024. She is currently serving her sentence at Edna Mahan Correctional Facility as of 2026. John Heffernan's other family members expressed shock at Sherry's actions. They described John as a man who had worked hard throughout his life and deserved to enjoy his retirement years with Francine. Instead, his final moments involved an attack by his own daughter over money and property. Francine's family mourned a woman who had found happiness in her later years, only to have it violently taken. While anger over inheritance drove one case, the next would involve a parent's complete breakdown. Ruth DiRienzo Whitehead. On January 31, 2023, police in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, responded to a call about an unresponsive person at a residence in Horsham. When officers arrived, they found Ruth DiRienzo Whitehead, 50 years old, with her son who had been fatally harmed. The scene suggested a tragedy that unfolded within the family home. What drives a parent to such an unthinkable act? Ruth's son died from strangulation using a belt. The method indicated sustained effort rather than an impulsive moment. Someone had to maintain pressure for several minutes to cause death by this means. The deliberate nature of the act stood in stark contrast to claims of mental breakdown or momentary loss of control. Background investigation revealed Ruth had been experiencing significant stress. Financial difficulties had mounted, creating pressure on the family. Court proceedings would later explore whether she had been in a psychotic state at the time of the act. The defense team presented psychiatric evaluations suggesting Ruth suffered from severe mental illness that impaired her judgment and understanding of her actions. However, prosecutors argued the evidence didn't support a complete break from reality. The method chosen and the sustained nature of the act suggested someone who understood what they were doing, even if their reasoning was distorted. The legal question centered on whether Ruth could distinguish right from wrong at the moment of the crime, the standard for an insanity defense under Pennsylvania law. The trial featured competing psychiatric experts. Defense psychiatrists described Ruth as someone in the grip of psychosis who genuinely believed she was saving her son from future suffering. Prosecution experts acknowledged mental illness, but argued she retained enough awareness to know she was ending a life, and that society deemed such acts wrong. The legal standard in Pennsylvania requires that a defendant understand the nature and quality of their act and know it was wrong. The prosecution's experts testified that despite Ruth's mental health struggles, evidence suggested she understood she was taking a life and concealed her actions afterward in ways that demonstrated awareness of wrongdoing. The defense countered that psychotic delusions can coexist with superficial awareness, and that her distorted beliefs about protecting her son negated criminal responsibility. During court proceedings, Ruth expressed remorse, stating, "I'm so sorry to the court and her family." The statement reflected awareness of what she had done and the harm it caused, potentially undermining claims of complete psychotic break. The jury heard her words alongside all other evidence in determining her culpability. The forensic evidence proved straightforward. Cause of death established, method clear, perpetrator identified at scene. The complexity arose in interpreting Ruth's mental state. Did financial stress trigger a psychotic episode, or did it provide motive for an act committed with awareness? The jury's verdict would hinge on their assessment of these psychological questions. The jury rejected the insanity defense and convicted Ruth DiRienzo Whitehead of murder. Following a bench trial in February 2024, Ruth DiRienzo Whitehead was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge noted that while mental illness may have played a role, the evidence supported that Ruth understood the nature of her actions. She remains incarcerated in a Pennsylvania prison facility. The case prompted discussions about mental health resources for families experiencing financial crisis. Advocates pointed to Ruth's situation as evidence that better screening and support might prevent such tragedies. Others countered that mental illness, while tragic, doesn't excuse taking a life, and that the justice system properly held her accountable. Family members who testified described a household that had been under strain, but gave no indication Ruth was planning anything. The speed with which the situation deteriorated from stress to fatality shocked those who knew the family. They struggled to reconcile the person they knew with the actions she committed. From a parent's breakdown to a case that shocked an entire state decades ago. Diane Downs. On May 19, 1983, Diane Downs drove to Mackenzie Willamette Hospital in Springfield, Oregon, with 3 injured children in her car. She claimed a stranger had flagged her down on a rural road and shot into her vehicle, harming her and her offspring. One child, 7-year-old Cheryl, was deceased. The other 2 children, 8-year-old Christy and 3-year-old Danny, had sustained serious injuries. Diane herself had a wound to her arm. The story seemed to describe a random attack, but inconsistencies in her account would quickly raise investigators' suspicions. What really happened on that isolated road? Police noticed Diane's demeanor seemed off for someone whose children had just been shot. She appeared strangely calm and showed more concern about a romantic relationship than about her children's conditions. Her injury to her arm seemed superficial compared to the critical wounds the children sustained. Why would a random attacker shoot children multiple times but barely graze the mother? Forensic examination of the car revealed troubling details. Ballistics experts found no evidence of shots fired from outside the vehicle. Blood spatter patterns and bullet trajectories suggested the shots came from inside the car. The physical evidence contradicted Diane's account of a stranger approaching and firing through the window. Someone inside that vehicle had pulled the trigger. Christy, who survived despite being shot, eventually provided testimony that her mother had been the shooter. The child's account, given after months of recovery and with assistance from therapists, described Diane pulling over retrieving a gun and shooting into the back seat where the children sat. The testimony from a child witness carried enormous weight, particularly as Christie had no reason to fabricate such a horrific story about her own mother. What could motivate a mother to shoot her own children? Investigation revealed Diane had been involved with a married man who had made clear he didn't want to be involved with someone who had children. Prosecutors theorized she saw her children as obstacles to this relationship. The callous calculation that eliminating them would make her more desirable to a romantic partner demonstrated a profound lack of maternal instinct or basic empathy. Diane Downs was arrested and charged with murder, attempted murder, and related offenses. Her trial in Oregon became a media sensation. The prosecution presented the forensic evidence contradicting her stranger attack story. They showed Christie's testimony describing her mother as the shooter. They established motive through testimony about the romantic relationship and the man's rejection of Diane's children. The jury convicted Diane Downs on all counts. She received life imprisonment plus 50 years. The judge emphasized the betrayal of trust involved when a parent harms their own offspring. Diane has maintained her innocence throughout decades of incarceration, claiming she is a victim of a miscarriage of justice. While imprisoned in Oregon, Diane briefly escaped in 1987, but was recaptured. The escape attempt demonstrated her continued unwillingness to accept her circumstances. Due to her high-profile escape in 1987, Diane Downs was transferred out of Oregon to the Clinton Correctional Facility in New Jersey for several years to ensure security before her eventual move to California. Her connection to New Jersey came through this brief imprisonment rather than the original crime. As of January 2026, Diane Downs remains incarcerated at Central California Women's Facility. Her most recent parole hearing in late 2025 resulted in a 3-year denial, meaning she will not be eligible to apply again until 2028. The Diane Downs case became one of the most studied examples of maternal filicide in criminal psychology. Her lack of remorse, her narcissistic personality traits evident in interviews, and her continued insistence on innocence despite overwhelming evidence have made her a subject of numerous books, documentaries, and academic analyses. The case fundamentally challenged assumptions about maternal instinct and demonstrated that the parent-child bond some take for granted can be absent in individuals with certain psychological profiles. Cheryl Downs, who died at 7 years old, was remembered as a bright, happy child. Her short life ended because she was seen as inconvenient by the person who should have protected her above all else. The tragedy of her case extends beyond the immediate harm to include the destruction of what should have been the safest relationship in any person's life. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.